today we have Kierra coming on. Kierra was somebody that had no financial literacy growing up, and not only did she learn it by 25 on her own, she also has 2 little ones that she's implementing in the household as well. We are going to welcome today Kierra Bussey. All right, so let's just get back into it. Let's talk about kind of like when you were, let's say, in your teens, in your growing up stage, maybe 5 to 10 years old. What was it like with your parents around money? Like, what was that conversation like? And what was the family dynamic like?
Yeah, so the earliest memories I have of money was that not so much we didn't have it, but we didn't have an abundance of it. We had just enough, right? I got the stereotypical, you don't have McDonald's. Do you have McDonald's money? Whenever I would ask for anything that was outside of the budget. Um, but I remember very clearly, my father was the one who handled the money. He made the money. And my mother more or less allowed my father to kind of handle money. And so I don't think like there was ever a conversation around what money looks like for me. I do remember very early because I was often told no when wanting something that I think that's when my entrepreneurial spirit kicked in because I was the kid that when it snowed, I was out there shoveling snow. I was the kid that was making lemonade, just making enough money to go to the corner store to buy candy and things of that nature. But it was very clear that, you had to work hard to earn money. Um, I'll talk more about that later because like I have some thoughts around that idea because certainly there's a work ethic that does have to go into making money. But I think what was kind of communicated to me is that, in order to have money, you have to work the 40 plus hours a week. You got to work overtime. And, you know, that has shifted a lot as an adult.
When you were a teen and you started like maybe getting a credit card or you started like actually making real money, not just like that lemonade money or the shoveling the driveway, when you actually started receiving that, what did you do with that money? Like where did that go? Did your parents tell you anything? Did they give you any financial education? Were you left in the dark? What was that like?
Yeah, I remember my first real job was working at McDonald's. And I definitely remember having a checking account. And I remember saving it. I was never much of a spender. I mean, I would spend my money on like big ticket items. I remember one summer I had bought an iPod Nano. Um, but I largely saved my money and I like just put it in a checking account because I knew that when you earn money, you were supposed to save it. But I never really had any formal education around this is how you make your money grow, if you will.
You dated yourself a little bit with that iPod Nano. What year? I'm trying to think of what year was that? Because like I obviously grew up in that stage as well.
I think that definitely was around like 2006,
It was
2006.
6. I was a freshman in high school, I think, at that point.
Mm,
That's great. Well, as far as okay, so you're saving money. It's funny you say that. So my first job was at McDonald's too. Actually, it was my second job. My first job was at Skyline Chili in Cincinnati, Ohio. But my second job was also another restaurant, which was McDonald's.
mhm.
What did you do there? I'm actually kind of curious.
Yeah, I took the orders.
I
I
got
took
I was on the orders until I got kicked off. Like
I almost got picked off.
I'd be messing up the orders, and they're like, "Yeah, you need to get back there on fries." So I was doing the same actually. It's funny you say that. Is like I didn't have formal education growing up either, and so like I saved my money. I was pretty good at saving, but like it just went to my savings, and I'm sure where you were earning what like 0.04%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Probably not even that. I don't even know that I had it in a formal savings account. I just knew that like you weren't supposed to spend what you made.
sure, sure. At what stage of the game did you realize, okay, this is good, but there's way better by investing?
Honestly, I didn't learn that lesson until I remember meeting my first financial advisor when I was a teacher in Brooklyn, and that was about 2015. So, I had already worked several professional jobs at that point. I always knew you were supposed to, whatever they said the employee match was, that's what I would try to put in my 401k, not really understanding how to balance or allocate your funds to specific target, funds and things of that nature. And I remember meeting my first financial advisor, and he's like, you got to open up a Roth IRA. There's tax benefits, yada, yada, yada. And I remember having that account. I remember allowing him to just balance it however he saw fit. But then I also remember I would always withdraw from it. And then I would always wonder why I had a big tax bill at the end of the year. Because I kind of looked at it as a savings account.
Mhm.
It wasn't until I met you where I was like, oh wait, your Roth IRA is not an emergency fund. It is investing in your retirement future.
Yep. What age were you when when that came?
25.
25. Gotcha. So for the first 25 years of your life, there was no financial education. It was mainly saving and stuff like that. What would you tell somebody that's like, let's say in that same position, they think saving might be the right vehicle, or they've been told that's a good thing. What would you tell them the difference between now you had the aha moment. What was the aha moment like? What would you tell somebody from that?
Yeah, the aha moment for me, honestly, and I know this may sound terrible, but it wasn't until I had my first six-figure job where I was like, oh, I need to learn how to manage money. And I would tell anybody listening that even if you're only making 24,000 a year, and I mean that so seriously, learn how to manage money and make it grow because I could compare myself to someone who's making half of what I made, and they may have more money than me. They may have a greater net worth than me because they understand how to manage and invest their money. And I think for me, by the time I had got to my first six-figure job, right, I had been 10 years into my my career trajectory, if you will. That is 10 years, right? If we think about the rule of 72, I missed out on an opportunity for my money to double. And so, even just learning that, like the rule of 72 of like, every seven, years or so, your money is projected to double, right? And then that compound interest, another 7 years, it doubles. So now, even when I think about investing for my kids, I'm like, oh, cool. I've already started investing for them. The first time their account is going to double when they hit seven, their account is going to double three times before they reach adulthood. Imagine if I would have gotten that education at 16, right? I've been working since I was 15. I could have had a Roth IRA. My account would have doubled at least three times at this point in my life.
Mhm.
Um, and you can use that for a down payment on a home. I know like a lot of pain points for young people nowadays is like, how can I even, get a home? Like I can barely, keep up with inflation and things of that nature, but it can work in your favor. The markets did really well this year. And when I look at my portfolio, I see like 20% returns.
Amazing. That's amazing to hear because like just do that for years and years and years. And honestly, guys, for anyone listening, 72 divided by 20 is way quicker to be. It's a 3.5 essentially is how many years it would take to double. So all you're doing is taking 72 divided by the return that you're getting on an annual basis on average, because obviously 20% are really high on an annual basis,
Right.
and taking that difference, and that's how often your money doubles. So 72 divided by 10 is 7 years, and that's what Kara was referring to. So that's phenomenal, first off. And especially you mentioned the children. So I always bring up the penny compound interest example. And a lot of people learn it in like fourth grade, and that's the only financial literacy they ever get. But that concept is applying to them because if, let's say, 63 years old when they retire, right? That is 9 multiples of every 7 years, right? That's 9 times your money's doubling. So if you put $1 in the very beginning of life, $1 doubles to $2, the first multiple. The second time it doubles to 4. The third multiple doubles to 8, and it just continues to do that. And that's the power of compound interest. And that's so good that you found that out so early. And honestly, 25 is not that old, relatively speaking. A lot of people don't figure this aha moment out until they're like 45 or 50. And then they're like, oh crap, I need to get to retirement. It's like almost impossible, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
It was Deloitte your first $100,000 job?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we have a lot
We
in
worked
common.
at McDonald's and then we worked at Deloitte together.
Yeah, exactly.
We did a lot of entrepreneur stuff growing up. It was like the same person. It's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
What? Okay, so now let's get into the child investing side of things, because obviously you mentioned that, and that's a huge piece of the puzzle because of the time. And time is like 80% of the wealth building. What
Mhm.
have you done for your children to put them in the best possible position?
Yep. So when I had my first son, I was not aware of you just yet. But I, quick Google search, like, how can I invest for my kids? And so I thought at the time, I think I had got this information from like Motley's Fool.
Yep.
Aren't there like a
Yep.
popular
That was
platform?
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna open up him and Upma, right? And then I started to learn more and more, and I'm like, I don't know if that's the best investment vehicle, but he still has it. I didn't shut it down for my first child. Essentially, he has control of that money once he reaches adulthood. And not that I don't think I'll trust my son with all of that money. I just think there's a better way to go about it.
Sure.
To make sure that he's good. And so by the time I had my second son, in 2022, I opened up a 529, which was the minimum 3,000 3K that you have to invest if you do it through Vanguard. And basically I'm 100% invested in the S&P 500, whatever the mutual fund is for Vanguard. And I like that, especially with the new regulation or law that says that even if your child decides they don't want to go to formal education, you can still use a certain amount of it as it converts to a Roth IRA, I believe. I want to make sure I'm giving the correct information.
100% correct. Up to
Yep.
35,000.
Right. And so for people who are like, oh, I don't want to push my son or daughter into college or higher education, it's still a great investment vehicle. And honestly, I've seen people say to themselves, like, okay, I'll invest 5K every year up until the age of 20. I mean, excuse me, up until the age of 5, which is what, 25,000, and then just let it grow
Yep.
for the remainder of their K through 12 education.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I mean, you're setting your kids up into a way that most of us have never been set up. I didn't get any money like that. Like
Mhm.
I didn't get a dollar, and so we were doing the same for my daughter. Plus, we're doing a different vehicle as well. We're doing like the parent taxable brokers on top of this. So like you mentioned the UPMA. Why don't you like the UPMA?
Just because it gives 100% control to him at 18. And the way that I want to invest in it, I feel like that's going to be a large sum of money.
Mhm.
And I don't know that, like, I want him to have access to all of that money. Like, I certainly do know that I'm going to do my best to educate him along the way. But I feel like with the parent taxable brokerage or a Roth IRA, if you will, there's still that limitation on it where, like, okay, you could take this money, right? But you're going to be taxed on it. So if you're taking this money, I want you to think twice about it. Whereas it's like, are you still taxed on the UTMA if they withdraw?
Yeah, so when it transfers to them and they actually would start, let's say, cashing out to use the unlife, yeah, there's absolutely capital gains.
Gotcha. So either way, you're gonna get taxed either way. Um, I don't know. I mean, my plan, my long-term plan is for them to have a 529 and then a Roth IRA. And those are the two investment vehicles that I want to use to kind of prepare them for their future. Because even when I think about myself, it would have been nice to have kind of like that cushion to kind of really explore what it is that I want to do rather than being pushed into something um out of survival's sake, right?
Yeah.
Because you need money to pay your bills, you need money to live.
Mhm.
And I just want to give them a little bit more room and space. I remember always being so slightly envious of the friends that, would graduate, then go backpack or live in another country for a couple of years and really just have that time to leisurely enjoy life, right? And I really want that for my children.
That's inspiring. I mean, you went from pretty much no financial education growing up to totally changing the family tree at, let's call it 25.
Mm.
And I remember there were some friends of mine as well that would do that whole like, what do they call it? A gap
Backpack.
year, a gap year, a leave year, whatever.
Yep,
I'm like,
exactly. The gap year.
what does this say? My parents never told me about this. Like, is this a thing? Like, I was like mind blown that was even a thing. Because I was always geared to like go to work and like go get money and stuff like that. I'm kind of curious though, like when your parents kind of trained you to work, right, to earn money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that came and played a dynamic into like the idea of compound interest and like kind of like that concept of compound interest and passive income kind of was like foreign to you because you always knew active income equals dollar?
That's precisely right. And I think what's so interesting about the times we're in, and I think what's so interesting for our parents, when I think about my parents, I think my father sometimes looks at me and thinks it's wild that I don't have to work as hard to make as much. I think, you know, he thinks it's wild that, like, okay, I could start an online business, have a digital product, and, specifically use that as income to pay for daycare or income to pay for the mortgage. And I think what the technology has allowed, my generation to do is think creatively and also innovatively because I do think there is something to be said for, my parents' generation where they didn't have access to these tools. And so maybe passive income wasn't something, unless you were an investor, that you readily had access to. And my commitment to myself in my family is now that I have access to understanding what passive income is, even through just investing, is to have like those vehicles where I can passively make income. Because I still feel entitled to that gap year and I'm gonna take it at some point. I want to be financially, secure. But yeah, I mean, the way to get there is to set up as many passive income vehicles as possible.
That's amazing. This inspires me because it's like you're not only you aren't blaming your parents at all, but you also are saying, I'm going to create my life and I'm going to create this life for me and my kids are going to live a life I wish I lived as well. What
Mhm.
kind of things do you do in the household to like educate them or to empower them to kind of like, obviously they're 3 and 1, they're young for anyone that's listening, so they're young, but like, what are your plans more so going forward?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that I'm really starting to teach my 3-year-old, even just now, it's like when we go to the store, he thinks that you could just pick things up and walk out the store with them. I'm like,
It's
no,
called
you don't.
shoplifting.
Right. So I've gotten into the habit where when we do go, like Target has like the dollar section. I'm like, you could pick out one or two things, right? And I just try to reinforce and reiterate that like this is a good or a service and you have to pay for it. Even when we, go to a play place, like mommy is paying for it. So I narrate anything that I do that has to do with money. So he like understands that. And then also he can identify money. So like he'll pick up a dollar, or he'll pick up a coin and he'll associate that with money. I don't know that he knows that it has value yet, but again, I don't think it's too early, even if you're just narrating what you're doing with money. And then even I even try to be careful not to say like mommy doesn't have money for that, right? Because I don't want that energetically. Like I want to be able to give my son everything he wants within reasonable means. But like I'll say things like, you have to earn that, or, next time we come, you'll earn that by doing X, Y, and Z. So just narrating. And I think as they continue to get older, like in all seriousness, I want to teach them how to invest as soon as they're able to grasp it. And, I'm a former educator, a teacher by trade. And so I'm just really excited. Like I imagine like Monopoly nights where we sit around and we play Monopoly, and then I take it way too seriously and give them an educational lesson about real estate. But I really want them to understand how wealth is generated and that you don't have to be born into it, because I believe that for a very long time that I had to inherently be born into a wealthy family in order to be wealthy. And I'm like, no, I have the opportunity to create it. And, you know, I also want to say this, I am in a lot of debt, but that doesn't discourage me from ultimately getting into that positive net worth. I know you and I talked about that a lot, but now that I understand how to get on that plus side, like I don't want to be a statistic that, a part of the statistic of like, black household income, only has a net worth of said dollar amount. No,
Yeah.
like we have the tools and
It's very
resources to
lower if you
break
look at the
past that.
demographics.
Yep, we have the resources and the tools to like break past that, but you have to have the discipline um to stick with it. And I think that's the hardest part in the conversation no one wants to have.
Well, I think it's really interesting you brought that up because I think the average person out there in general thinks that like wealth is just given, right? They're like, "Oh, well, you just came from a trust fund." 210 people are actually given wealth, and so like 80% of people are first generation millionaires. And I think the biggest thing is access to education, and so that's why I preach education so much. And obviously, you're a the teaching world, so you probably very much align with that. What would you tell somebody out there that's like, I didn't come from wealth. I have access to education, but I don't realize how maybe important it is because I just, see people posting about stuff and everyone gets rich online. What would you tell somebody that's looking for that stuff to like really apply it to their life so they can be the next Kara?
Yeah. Wow, not the next Kierra, but do better than me right now. I would say start with one resource. And when I think back about, connecting with you and your resources, I made it a point not to become overwhelmed with everything out there, because there's a lot of information out there, right? Everyone's going to have their own way of doing things, but connect with someone that resonates with you. Connect with someone where you can receive what they say with ease and apply it. You don't have to apply everything at once. You take one thing, like, in retrospect, right? You have a whole plan of like, hey, this is how you need to structure your financial journey. I was stubborn and did not follow that, Brendan.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that I did follow was I was like, okay, at the very least, I am going to max out my Roth IRA moving forward, because to know better is to do better. And so that is the one commitment I made to myself. And I give myself grace, because of course I could have done better. But I would just say, like, find that one resource that really resonates with you. Budget Dog is a great place to start. And then find, if you can commit to more than one thing at once, do it. But really tap into the discipline and the psychology. You've recommended this book so many times, and I finally had the opportunity to listen to it. The Psychology of Money. It's so simple, but yet so like mind blowing. Like, there's so many things in there where I'm like, I've made this journey a lot more complicated than it needed to be.
Yeah, I think wealth is simple, and like people always like I try to like I'm careful when I say that kind of stuff because a lot of people think it's like sweeted or stuck up, and I'm like I don't intend it to sound like that. Like my intention is that hey, like I'm trying to inspire everyone to do this, and like if you want to do this, you can do this, and it's
Mhm.
widely available to people, and it's at their disposal, at their fingertips. You mentioned Psychology of Money, how much of a role that played on you. What about that? The simplicity of it kind of like spoke to you.
I think to your point, where I was that person who would hear someone say wealth is simple, and I'm like, yeah, for you it is.
Yeah, for you, it's like, okay, okay,
Yeah.
asshole.
But then I think reading The Psychology of Money contextualized that statement of like, oh wait, it actually is simple. What makes it challenging for me, Kierra, is the fact that I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. But now that I'm very principled in how I manage my money, I can ultimately get there. And some people can get there sooner than later, but I know and I'm confident that I'm ultimately going to be able to get there. Um, I think he makes a lot of great points about even people who are at the millionaire status who lose it all. And it just talks about the behavior behind our thoughts around money. Because I think your behavior really is what determines if you're wealth, right? When I speak about wealth, like I'm not saying like, oh, like millionaire, multimillionaire. I'm just speaking about, how do you define wealth for yourself? For me, it's the freedom and the choice to move throughout this world the way I would like to. Not being beholden to a job. I was recently laid off from Deloitte, and, it was devastating, right? But I think that was also another wake up call where it's like, that can't be your only source of income. It is a source of income, but it can't be your only source of income, because then you're depending on this one thing to help you along your journey to get to what your definition of wealth is. And so, um, just to reiterate, I would just really think about defining what wealth means for you, and then having the behavior and the actions to back up that definition.
So strong of a point. Like the system and the behavior is everything. Like you could build a millionaire net worth, but typically you're not going to if you don't have those things. And then when you do, if you somehow come across money, you are the 20% that got inherited money. There's a good chance you blow that money. Or it's not hard to spend $1 million. It really isn't if you really want to, if you have no discipline. And obviously that you're living a different lifestyle than the average person, but if you got that money and you don't have the systems and behavior, you are going to wreck yourself really, really quick. It's like
He made a good point. He said there's a difference. Everyone wants to be a millionaire. He's like, there's a difference between wanting the million and spending it, and then actually having it. Because someone who actually has $1 million, they're not spending. That's not their spending habits. They're spending far below their means, because that's kind of what's necessary in order to keep it.
exactly. And I always like tell people like you can enjoy your life. Like I don't want you to like sit here and like live in a box and like be a hermit. Like go take that gap year if whatever you want to do. I think that's really really powering. One thing I want to talk about is the debt payoff. You mentioned you paid off a bunch of credit cards. I think $20,000 total. What was that process like? Was it intimidating in the beginning? Like holy crap, I have all this debt. Like how do we emotionally grasp that?
Yeah. So I'm laughing to myself because I paid it off and ran it back up. But that let me answer the first part of the question first.
Yeah.
Um it was intimidating. And I think the hardest part for me, and I avoided it for a long time. I was like, I'll do it tomorrow, next week, next month. The hardest part was sitting down with the reality of like, dang, these are what my numbers look like, and this is what my income looks like, and this is 50% of my how did I even get here? Like,
Yeah.
why am I in the space where my debt is almost in alignment with what I'm making. That I so and again, that's the psychology that can hold you back in a way if you don't just move past it and understand like I got here, now we got to get out. And so I think I used the avalanche method where I am a numbers person and I wanted to pay off the cars that had the highest interest first. Um, and I paid off all like I think I had started with like nine credit cards, which is ridiculous for personal credit. And I think once I paid those cards off, right? Again, the behavior was I'm going to use them if I have them. So I closed the accounts. I took the hit. It wasn't even a big hit to my credit score, honestly, because I had one.
I guess people act like it is. It's like I think it's a
It's
stereotype
not.
that industry throws out to the
It,
mass
it
public.
it definitely is because again, everything is psychology and behavior, and they know if you close these accounts, you can't use them.
Yep.
But once I had paid off a 10K a card, it was PayPal, and then another Amazon card. And there was a lot of sacrifice involved. Because I would always remember taking my disposable income, which again, I had a good amount of it, because I had received a huge pay raise. And I'm like, dang, like this is $1,000. I could buy the purse that I've always wanted. I can go on that vacation. And I had to say to myself, okay, if I look, I'm 33 now. I'll be 34 2 months now in April. And I'm like, okay, if I put the discipline in now and I look at, my 30s, this is going to be a very small glimmer in what the rest of my life can look like because I have the behavior, I have the psychology and I have the understanding. I'm not going to get back to this place. And the only reason why I mentioned that I kind of got back into the debt was because of the layoff. And that unfortunately put me in a position where like I had to lean on it a little bit. But again, I'm very committed to you know, once I get in alignment with where I'm getting my income from, I'm starting that process back up again. And then the other lesson I learned was I think the mistake I made initially was I was stubborn. I was like, I have job security. I'm good. I'm working on a big project. And I was aggressively paying off debt. I was not worried about an emergency fund. I was like, well, I have my Roth IRA, which we know Kierra likes to depend on her Roth IRA as if it's an emergency fund, and it's not. And I had, my 401k. And I'm like, if anything happens, I have the equity in my home, blah, blah, blah. I just need to pay off the debt. And I would encourage everyone, again, like, make sure you're good. Like, the credit card companies are gonna get their money, but you gotta have that nest egg because then what ends up happening is, if you are in a compromised position, now cool, you've made all this headway with paying off debt, but now you have to rely on it again because you don't have any cash. You're cash poor. And so while I was paying off debt, I was cash poor. And so I'm at the point now where I'm like, okay, let me build up my cash reserve first and foremost, and then we'll hit debt.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's like the Dave Ramsey method is like, hey, I think it's get down to $1,000 and then pay everything else off. It's like not for everybody. It's like
Yeah.
there's not one size fits all. Like some people might do that, some people might not, and like it
It's
depends
what
where
works.
you're at. And like
Yeah.
you mentioned, like you felt good. You had this new project at Deloitte. You felt good, and then boom, reality struck, and you're like, it's not what I expected. But that's what an emergency is. It's when you don't expect it. You're not going to expect it. That's the purpose. So that's a strong point. So, Kara, this has been amazing. What would you tell somebody listening to this, trying to get their money right, trying to figure this game out, and like they're just on that sideline, they're wondering like, I need some hope. What would you tell them?
Ooh, that's a great question. Hmm. I would say, first, anyone listening that needs hope, I always refer back to one of my favorite quotes, and it'll make sense. But definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. You are not defined by your current situation. Right now, today, in this moment, you have the power to define what your present and what your future will look like. And once you have that definition, you can then go through, you can pick apart that definition and think about the behaviors and the actions aligned to that definition and be that. And,
That's
and you get to where you
so
are.
powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today. This has been amazing. Anybody listening, guys, Kara's a superstar. She was able to work at McDonald's like me, work at Deloitte like me. But more importantly, she's not only figuring out her specific situation, she figured out her kid's situation. You guys can do the same. And again, Kara, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to Money on My Mind with your host, Brendan Schlagbaum. If you found value in today's discussion, share it with someone who could benefit from it too. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you never miss a money mastery tip. Until next time, stay passionate about your financial journey and keep taking bold steps towards your money goals.